Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I think that we have a tremendous panel that really represents each component of what we're going to be discussing today. Dan Davis with CenturyLink, Robert Pepper, Facebook, Don McNeil with EdgeConneX. So a global network company, internet content company, and then the enabling data center and emerging innovation of what we're seeing with a company like EdgeConneX. Our topic today is a global network challenge. How do you build and connect the networks of the future? And what I'd like to do to kind of start things off is let Dan tell his story of what his company's priorities are today, the projects, partnerships, and then what you see as the drivers and the game changers as we go forward over the next year, 2 years, 3 years.
Sure. Chip, thanks for inviting me to attend today. It's a pleasure to be up here with you and my esteemed colleagues. As I was preparing for today, I think there are probably 3 trends in the networking world we can agree on. One, from a cost perspective, fiber optic networks, global networks are incredibly expensive and continue to be incredibly expensive to deploy, both from a capital perspective and an operating perspective. Despite a lot of technological innovation, I don't see that changing significantly. Second, when you look at the density that's required, you have some emerging technologies like 5G. They're going to require a fair amount of additional fiber densification out there to be deployed. And the networks we do put in the ground are going to have to continue to become faster and faster. You have video over various content providers such as Facebook that are really driving a continuing need for higher and higher bandwidth. So we need very expensive assets deployed. We need them deployed, need to perform faster, and they need to be deployed to more places. And the question is, how as an ecosystem are we going to actually fund that? How are we going to work together to achieve that deployment? And so as we've experienced, I think it's going to require some new innovative business models that don't exist today, and some business relationships with some characteristics that may not exist today. And CenturyLink has put in place some of those relationships already, and a number of discussions going on in very innovative structures. And as I kind of reflect on some of the innovation, at least in the business relationships, I think that what we found works well to achieve this is focus on the customer at the end of the day. We all work as a part of an ecosystem in serving the same end user customer. We each have differing points along that value chain, but keep your eye on the customer experience, the end user experience. Second of all, as we approach these relationships, I suggest we focus on how do we bring value to each other rather than how do we capture value from each other. I think there are, in each of our companies, a lot of focus in capturing value of sales teams who have a more transactional approach. I think the partnering approach that you alluded to is a far better model, and we've actually had a fair amount of success with that. And I think that the other piece that's worked well is focusing on our own core competencies and getting comfortable partnering with each other and trusting each other to fulfill the needs that we have that are outside of our core competencies. So I think it requires kind of a mindset shift for those of us who already haven't made the shift to focusing on the end user customer. And it requires a different approach to business relationships. Business relationships, as everyone knows, are very personal at a very high level from time to time. We have to learn to trust each other and rely on each other if we're going to achieve the fiber densification that's required and manage how we share risks and share costs in different ways.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, so from Facebook's perspective, we start by thinking about the ecosystem of the internet, right? And the fact that, we take for granted everybody's connected, but of course there's 3.5 billion people connected and there's 4 billion people who are not connected. So the way we've organized that, the way we look at it in terms of networks and investment, is part of it is the existing network and connectivity and the 1.8 billion people on the planet connected to Facebook, which is pretty amazing. I mean, I'm there all of 5 months, and that was like, wow. And that to grow that, in terms of the overall ecosystem, is thinking about networks and connecting all the parts of the globe. And in those networks, which are sort of the core networks, reaching out around the world, first we think that the model of networks, network investment, network build out, network utilization is really sort of an open access model, and it's about ownership in terms of access to fiber and being able to build on top of that. It's no longer, and we've heard this, by the way, in the submarine cable workshops on Sunday. We heard it yesterday. We've heard it today. It's about sharing capacity, sharing sort of access to the fibers and participation. It's not buying bandwidth in the old model. It's not kind of a wholesale model. It's really about sharing infrastructure. And that's the other thing, which is absolutely what Dan said. It's about collaboration and new partnerships. Building partnerships that even just 2, 3, 4 years ago, people weren't thinking about, and building out new types of relationships and very symbiotic relationships between traditional network operators and application content providers like Facebook. But that's where the networks already exist. So part of the approach is, how do we get networks out there? How do we invest in the increased capacity that's needed for the increased demand and the new applications? But the second question that we're trying to think about and actually address very directly is, what about the 4 billion people who are not connected? What about the places that do not have infrastructure? And we have a connectivity labs and our internet.org activities and a project called Telecommunications Infrastructure Project, or TIP, working with partners and organizations, operators globally, diagnosing the gaps, what's missing in different places, and inventing new technologies and solutions that will begin to fill those gaps. So just two as an example. How do you get backhaul and middle mile gigabit Ethernet to places that have no infrastructure? I mean, like no infrastructure, parts of Central Africa. So it's not like, updating, fiber. There's nothing. So, about a little over 2 years ago, Facebook bought a little startup company working on drones in the UK. 18 months later, last June, the first one flew. The concept is really a drone that has the wingspan of a 737, but only weighs about 1,000 pounds. It's going to go up to 60 to 80,000 feet and circle over, a village or whatever for 3 months at a time, solar powered. There will be, in the concept, dozens, if not hundreds of these that will be meshed together with laser, free space optics. So, if you're in Africa, you may have one over, a cable landing station on the coast and beam up using radio, and then mesh together with laser beams, and then over a village beam down, again with radio. So that's solving the backhaul problem where there isn't any. That project is called Aquila. The first one of those flew in June. It was supposed to fly for 30 minutes. It flew for over 90 because it was so successful. And we're working on the next version for the flight segment, where people are developing new materials and solar and lasers, doing some really interesting things. Second, another problem, diagnosing, how do you bring gigabit Ethernet into high density populations in big cities in the developing world, or in the developed world, but in a city like Mumbai, right? You're not going to be, anytime soon, putting fiber into that neighborhood. So we have a project, again, we've talked about publicly, called Terragraph. It's being designed to use the V-band, which is up at 60 gigahertz with very small cell, beamforming antennas, massive MIMO, to be able to get, again, sort of a very high capacity connection into those neighborhoods. And the idea is to make all of this, as I said earlier, open source. So, and it's not an open access. So it's not about Facebook operating and then selling off bandwidth. It's inventing the technology and making it available for really anybody to use to solve these gaps, these problems. So it's really on both sides, and it's very active. But core to this, partnerships and collaboration.
Thank you, Robert. Don?
I am probably the most boring on the panel. We don't have any drones or anything to fly. For those familiar, we're layer 0, so we're kind of at the bottom of the stack, really providing that enabling infrastructure. But certainly there's been some great examples of the evolution of connectivity, whether it be in the core of the network, but more importantly and increasingly the edge. And about 3 years ago when EdgeConneX was formed, the hypothesis was exactly this, that the networks that were built that have really allowed the internet to first be established and more importantly flourish, and not only change our lives as consumers, but now increasingly change lives and change the way business is done for enterprises. So as you fast forward the clock, the network that got us there, the internet, if you will, needs a new topology. There needs to be a new capability to flatten out the network, and that's where EdgeConneX comes in. So over the last 30 months, we've built out 30 data centers, ranging in size from 2 megawatts all the way up to in excess of 30 megawatts. And a lot of the key characteristics, the value proposition of our business model is to enable all this transformation. And one of the key characteristics is to listen to our customers and really build next generation data centers where our customers need them. And when I say next generation, it's not just technology, because there certainly has been evolution in technology, but the mechanical and electrical equipment hasn't evolved all that much, although certainly opportunity to do so. But more importantly, it's how we sell the service. So being a carrier neutral, i.e. allowing different networks to come in and benefit from a new data center properly built in the right location, as well as providing an equal opportunity, if you will, for over-the-top providers. So all of these great capabilities, whether it's content or applications, to have the ability to have a great access and therefore better economics and performance. And then finally, being able to have a business model that allows infrastructure and allows the data center component of that infrastructure to scale with growth. So, as close as possible as we think about the world of cloud and all that it's done with regard to pay per use or elasticity, we like to think that even though we're deep in the infrastructure, we still have components of our business model that allow that elasticity or that transparency, if you will, to scale with our customers' needs.
As we sit here, and I'm just thinking about the partnerships, the drivers. Encompass is a U.S.-based association that used to represent CLEC and long distance, and we're thinking about this tremendous evolution over the last 20 years. And over the last 3 years, what we have tried to do is symbolized on this stage today, is to bring the internet content companies together with all the network companies, both wired, wireless, domestic, and international, and the data centers, so that you have all of the infrastructure and then the drivers that are coming through internet content. As y'all look forward, tell me a little bit what you mean by new business models. Talk a little bit about a partnership between what has been over the last probably 15 years, sometimes a tense relationship between networks and content, but now seems to be emerging into a partnership where both complement and need each other. And then how the data centers not only facilitate that, but the economic development. Wherever you place a data center, what does that happen to a local, regional, international economic development? So if you could talk a little bit about y'all's partnership as a traditional network company, now global network company, partnering with Facebook.
Sure. As we've looked at content companies, they would typically fall in an enterprise sales channel, and you would make sales to them. It's a transactional approach. What do you need? I take an order, I fulfill an order. And of course, as the companies are getting started, that's a model that works. as some of these content companies, as our friends on stage, have reached kind of a hyper-global scale, if you look at the way they buy and what they buy, the scale that they buy at carrier scale, larger than most carriers out there. You have to shift your mindset to, okay, this is not just a transactional model where I give you a price and you give me an order and I fulfill it and you pay a bill. You have to step back and say, look, this is now actually a peer, not in the traffic exchange perspective, but you're actually a peer in the networking world. And so you're standing shoulder to shoulder and saying, how can we share risks in a new way? How can we, recover value in a new way? How do we put our two core competencies together and make, 1 + 1 = 3? That's that mindset change that I touched on. That's what's worked well for us. We're looking at replicating that, but it's really approaching folks as peers and as partners rather than customers. Because if you think about it, they're a customer. We're actually both, as I touched on, both serving that same end user customer as we work with Facebook, the same end user customer that's on their phone and looking at their child's video, on Facebook. That's the same end user customer. I may call Facebook a customer, but really the customer among us is that person on their mobile phone looking at that video. So to me, that's the difference.
So is it shifting from competitive to collaborative?
Well, when you think about it, a network provider and a content provider never really were competitors, right?
Yes, I think of it as symbiotic, because the demand is being driven by the web scale companies, whether it's Facebook or e-commerce companies like Amazon, or earlier we had the session with content with Netflix. It's the web scale companies that are driving the demand that actually creates the economic revenue and opportunities for the traditional network operators. But the business models that are shifting, that when you have the web scale companies creating sort of this demand on these crazy growth curves, the old models of how you would buy connectivity just don't work anymore. So again, we don't necessarily talk a lot publicly about all of, rarely do we talk about the deals, but one that has been so talked about a little bit publicly is the Maria cable, which is goes from Virginia Beach, Virginia to Spain, and it's a joint venture between Facebook, Microsoft, and Telefonica. So that you would just a couple of years ago you would never have said, oh yeah, Telefonica, Microsoft, and Facebook are all going to get together and build a cable together, but that's the model that you're beginning to see globally, domestically in the U.S., but also globally, where there's shared investment, shared equity, and the ability, as the demand increases, to get additional capacity to build out, because we're not on the old traditional incremental capacity curves. In fact, one of the earlier sessions on that Joe's session on cloud this morning, right? Question was asked, well, what about the investment? One of the panelists said, last time we saw, quote, overcapacity on the networks was 2000, right? And I think that's right. And that's again, earlier this week, Telegeography had another one of their great sessions, and the question was, is there a new bubble? And their answer was no, it's not a bubble. That in fact, the huge demand and the growth curves are just absorbing everything that's being built.
Yeah, what we've seen in our partnerships is we have businesses, customers we support, that lighting a pair of fibers and getting 8 to 10 terabits at a time, the process of lighting those fibers 6, 9 months, whatever, is not fast enough. You're lighting multiple fiber pairs at a time. That's an incredible statement for one enterprise.
So I think I'd add in the context of these new partnerships, we like to think we fill a role as a peacemaker. So if you think back 3 years ago with the kind of the growth of over-the-top content being delivered over internet service provider backbones, there was a lot of strain being placed on it. And then certainly the whole context of net neutrality as to, well, who pays for all this? But by adding more locations, more points for content offload in a more efficient manner, the argument starts to go away. And you can move from pointing fingers as to who's paying for what and how does money change hands, but more importantly now, adding that efficiency so you can enjoy the great capability that we all love as consumers, but more importantly, allow the underlying providers, whether they be in the core or at the edge, to scale their business models respectively. Because that, doing harm doesn't really help anybody in that regard. And I think underpinning all that too is, in addition to just the ability for the operators to get along better, is the performance. So as consumers then, we don't experience that circle of death, if you will, that pinwheel of death known as rebuffering. But that's just one example of kind of a detraction from the experience that we've all enjoyed in kind of good old-fashioned linear TV. Now as we take more and more of our content on our mobile devices or various devices, the addition of content offload at the edge is a tremendous improvement in performance, all of which is very measurable.
Yeah, and just picking up on what Don said also about data centers, right? So data centers are being put in places with for diversity reasons, and also for low energy cost reasons, and but not always where the traditional existing networks are. So we're seeing new investment in networks to connect data centers, and that's where a huge amount of the traffic is coming from. So we're seeing new network requirements where there hadn't been those types of networks in the past. So that's also driving investment. It's again a different business model, but again, it's all built on partnerships and this symbiotic relationship. We can't exist without each other.
As I listen to y'all, it makes me think that we're about to enter into a new era of networks and network investment, driven by the content.
Yeah.
But also, for the first time, wired and wireless, instead of either displacing or replacing each other or competing against each other, as we go to 5G, it actually will drive more fiber for the backhaul, for the densification, for the mesh that is needed. And so we'll see both major investment in wireless technologies and 5G, which will drive major fiber. As you talk about drone technologies and satellite, multiple platforms. I'm thinking back in the Robert, as we were talking about the history of the wireless industry in the U.S., that very quickly went from 10 million to 100 million to 200 million to now over 300 million. I'm thinking with broadband connectivity of the world on a global scale at 3.5 billion, but still 4 billion to go, that we're about to see that worldwide, aren't we? As far as network capacity and deployments of new networks to connect everyone to the internet. And that will drive these data center investments, the wired wireless investments, new technologies like drones. It really is an exciting time, isn't it? And it's going to take much more of the partnership approach that y'all have been discussing. So any game changers that y'all see in the next 2 years, whether it's 5G or other major drivers to your business model and your investment plans?
I think we've touched on two of them here. One is 5G, which will drive fiber densification. I think we probably can't understate the importance of that, and the kind of halo effect of getting fiber closer and closer to other enterprises and other end users, other residential end users. Clearly, that's going to drive a lot of investment. Clearly, that's going to drive a lot of innovation. I think there's probably two trends I see. One, the requirement for lower latency, you'll have low latency applications and devices enabled by 5G. The other piece is, to Don's business, is the move of content to the edge. I think we're right on the edge of seeing serious movement of content to the edge to try to relieve the backhaul on the network so that we can use that expensive backhaul.
So the architecture.
Absolutely, that will drive an architecture change, content moving to the edge. Looking kind of beyond that, I think probably the next step would be compute farther to the edge. But I think that's just a little bit farther out.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to ask Don about sort of trends in CDNs to take that content to the edge, because some of the things that we're seeing is growth of traffic over CDNs. But to your point, right? We used to have this question: is it going to be wireless or is it going to be fixed? And the answer is yes. Because even on every wireless operator's network, right? The architecture is the first thing that happens is it goes into fixed network, right? And unless you have fiber to every base station and tower, it's not going to scale. Yeah. So we're going to need fiber deep into the networks to make all that work, even if the way people connect their devices is going to be predominantly wireless, right? In a 5G world, it all is going to be aggregated into and be totally dependent on fiber in the aggregation, right? So that's also a kind of a change.
Yeah.
I wouldn't point to any one technology, but I'd say it's the increasing pace of adoption of enterprise adoption of the cloud. I would tell you that my opinion is we're in the first out of the first inning, and I think there's so much more to go. And more importantly, it's moving from, I'll call it non-mission critical workloads, but now moving more to mission critical workflows, where companies are really going to depend on the cloud, the availability of it, and the performance of it to run their business, much like we've been used to in enterprise data centers. So I think the increasing pace of that will validate that the underlying architecture, namely at the edge and in the access networks, needs to change and will change, and really to take advantage of all the other investments we've been making, both on wireline and wireless.
I feel like we've just touched the tip of the iceberg of what y'all could talk about. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left of our time. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. This gentleman right here was the first one I saw, so we can do that.
Wonderful networks, but what are you going to do about stopping delivering all these bad guys to my front door?
Oh yes, security and privacy is another major challenge that will have to be faced by both on an international as well as country by country basis and company by company. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts.
I'd say a couple things. First and foremost is just kind of the natural approach of distribution and flattening, right? I will use the term, you reduce your attack surface. Secondly, I think is that all this great technology that we're finding with regard to virtualizing, back office systems and network systems, that I believe is a capability that lends itself naturally to properly predicting, identifying, and then ultimately kind of, I won't say stopping, but mitigating attacks in the cyber domain. So I think there'll be, and already has been, tremendous recognition, but I think all the great things that are coming will be better, we'll design it in, and we'll be better at it ultimately.
Any other in the back?
Armand Musi from Summit Ridge Group. You talked a lot about the high cost of fiber densification and the challenges of doing that, but also the need to do that. I'm wondering if there was maybe overlooked some alternatives such as millimeter wave, wireless backhaul, laser backhaul, other technologies that might alleviate the need for such expensive fiber densification, and where you think those technologies are headed?
Sure, I think Bob touched on it. I think it's not necessarily wired versus wireless or optical through air solution. I think you have to look at what's the optimum mix to solve a particular problem. I think you have to have all these tools in the tool belt that you pointed to really hit that most efficient deployment model. It's not fiber all the way to the edge. I use that as a construct just to think about whether it might be laser through air. The point is the expense is something that has to be shared. But I take your point. You have to have a lot of different technological solutions. They may look different in North America than South Africa, for example. But certainly, I think they all fit in the ecosystem of solutions.
Yeah, and we don't think one size fits all, right? And so they're going to be a heterogeneous set of requirements, and there's going to be a heterogeneous set of solutions. Just an example, some of you may have heard of something called TIP, Telecommunications Infrastructure Project, that we've initiated, but it's with traditional operators and carriers, web-scale companies, startups, and the whole idea is to have collaboration for new technology solutions that will be made available to everybody to try to drive those costs down to be able to do exactly what you're saying, but not with any notion of specific technology in mind in advance. That's progressing.
I'm afraid our time is up. This has been a great panel. I want to thank each of y'all for agreeing to be a part of this, letting me participate and host, and thank each of y'all for being here.
Thank you.